Good evening, traveller, and let your breath slow as the lantern of your mind grows dim, because tonight we will wander softly and without hurry into the warm and smoky heart of a medieval kitchen, a place where dawn wakes before the sun and where the rhythm of ladle and hearth is as steady as a lullaby. Picture stone walls stained by 100 winters of soot, a hearth wide as a doorway, hook and trammel dangling over a cauldron that remembers every soup it has ever held. And on the flagstones, a cat curled like a comma in a long sentence, listening to embers whisper their first hello to morning. The cook stirs awake before the rooster has sorted his thoughts into a crow, rubbing sleep from eyes used to firelight rather than daylight, reaching for kindling stacked near the ash, feeling, with practiced fingers for the driest twigs, arranging a pyramid of promise, then touching a coal kept alive in last night's ash bed, coaxing it with breath until it glows like a small, patient star. And as the flame takes, the room nods in approval. Copper glints, iron yawns, bread rinds exhale their memory of crust and heat. Water goes on to warm, not yet a boil, only that soft trembling that means calm beginnings. Outside, the wind moves through the courtyard and carries in a thin morning of mist, while above, the hall still sleeps, tapestries holding their own dreams of hunts and saints. The cook does not rush because the kitchen is a kingdom that punishes hurry, and instead he moves in that deliberate hush of someone who has spent a lifetime listening to stews explain themselves. He checks the pantry, cool and shadowed, where sacks of barley stand like stout monks, and onions braided in ropes drowse against a beam, and a small hoard of salt, dear precious salt, waits under a lid to be spent like silver, only when needed. He fingers a cone of sugar as if it were a relic, because it is, and smiles at the thought that some merchant ship and some desert camel and some far off hand ground and wrapped what will sweeten a lord's almond cream. In the buttery there are casks of ale and a tun with a flat, friendly scent, and in the larder a promise of rabbits, if snares were kind, pigeons, if the loft was generous, maybe a joint of pork salted 3 days past, maybe not. The day will tell him what the day wants to be, for in this world there is no recipe without weather, and no plan without luck. A kitchen boy arrives, wiping his nose on his sleeve, whispering a good morning that rises like steam, and the cook gives him a small task: grind oats into meal, steady as a prayer. The mortar is older than the boy, and the pestil's rhythm is a heartbeat for those who have not yet learned their own. Another helper arrives, bright-cheeked with cold, bringing a basket of leeks and carrots traded at the gate, their tops still wet with the field's last yawn, and tucked shyly among them a rare handful of herbs. Sage as green as a soft promise, time smelling of hillside sun the kitchen never sees. Somewhere a bell sings one note from the chapel, and with that single chime the cook's mind settles the day's first picture. Pottage for the lower tables, thick and humble, the kind that sits and waits kindly until the world is ready for it. For the high table, if the hunter smiles, a roasted bird or two, and a pie with herb custard, and if the fishmonger appears with a carp bright as a polished shoe, then perhaps a Lenten pudding of breadcrumbs, almond milk, and spice to say that fasting can also taste like celebration. The cook rinses his hands in warm water, the steam lifting a little garden into the air, and he checks the cauldron, adding barley with a sound like rain on a pond, stirring with a spoon carved smooth by a generation of wooden patience. The fire answers with a long sigh, as fat from a scrap of last night's lard melts and gives the day its first flavour. Knives wake up on the whetstone with a song that says everything important takes time. The cook peels onions with a tenderness that honours the tear to come, and when those tears bloom, he lets them fall like benedictions into the stew. The market sends word. The spice merchant is at the lower gate, with pepper dear as a vow and cinnamon curled like a sleeping child, and so a boy is sent with coins that clink like small bells, and instructions precise as spells. If pepper is fresh and fair, buy a modest palmful, for pepper turns a stew into a story, and stories were made for winter. The morning advances, and the scullions arrive like swallows, flitting between tasks, froth bucketing the trenches, those old rounds of yesterday's bread that will become today's plates, scraping and sanding the boards smooth with salt and sand, humming a market tune about a girl and a doorstep and a moon. In the hall above, the steward treads with his slow, important shoe, and the cook hears it the way a lake hears a pebble, a small surrender of silence. A message arrives on thin parchment. Today the Lord expects a visitor, some tenant with a face like yesterday's weather, and the hall will want a quieter dignity than usual. The cook agrees with no one in particular and revises his plan, without fuss, because the kitchen is the art of saying of course to the unreasonable and welcome to the unexpected. He calls for ground almonds to be soaked in warm water until they give up their white memory, making a milk gentle enough for fasting, rich enough for kindness. The fire has settled into its patient body, coals like constellations under their own sky. And when the first taste is taken, a sip from the side of the spoon, a lip-burned consideration, he nods as if a question answered itself. Midday sneaks in by fragrance, not by clock, and the hall rouses, boots and skirts and gossip, and the pottage thickens, as if listening for footsteps. The cook layers an herb pie with marjoram and a whisper of cheese, the crust crimped with the same care you give to a letter, and he salts. The pigeons lightly, because salt should never shout, it should only awaken what is already asleep. The spit boy, thin as a reed and twice as quick, takes his station by the turning handle, a seat that teaches patience and burns freckles onto knuckles, and the pigeons revolve like a slow planet under a sun of coals, their skin going from pale to golden to that final hush of brown that means home. The cook bastes with a brush of rosemary, and the room becomes a chapel of smell. In the corner, a pot of peas murmurs to a piece of pork bone about the nature of comfort. And on a sideboard the honey jar glows as if it gathered a meadow and kept it for such a day. The steward descends, inspects with an eye trained to dislike, and then nods, a generosity so rare it might as well be spring. The dishes begin their journey up the stone steps, carried by hands that have fed 100 afternoons, and each plate leaving the kitchen is a leaf falling upward. The hall receives them with a murmur round and satisfied. Yet the cook eats none of it now, because work tastes best only once it is finished. So he allows himself a sip of ale that tastes like the field's afterthought, and he stands at the back door where the courtyard breathes under a grey sky, feeling the wind rub its cool cheek against his warm one. This is the hour he loves, when the kitchen is a boat in a still harbour, and he can listen to it creak and sigh and remember that the same sun that shines on kings also shines on carrots. He thinks of home, a cottage with walls that hold the smell of peat, where his wife turns a small wheel of cheese wrapped in linen, and where his little son chases a chicken with the seriousness of a knight. Sometimes his mind wanders to the guild, to the rules that keep his craft honest. Do not water the ale, do not lie about the fish, do not waste the Lord's pepper, do not forget that bread is work and work is prayer. The afternoon asks softly for preparation because evening will want. Its splendour and even modest houses desire a bit of theatre after sunset. The cook checks the fish pans, feels their weight like a question, and sends the boy to the river with a fisherman's coin and a fisherman's hope. If fish comes, there will be parsley sauce and a splash of vinegar that makes the tongue look up. If fish does not come, there will be something else, because kitchens are made of something else. He orders dough to be worked for small manchet loaves, white and tender as a dream, saved for those who sit where candles stand tall. For everyone else there will be maslin bread, honest and brown, with rye and wheat holding hands. Flour dusts the air and hangs like sunlight you can touch, and the kneading is a slow conversation between hand and hunger. In the still room, where jars of flowers sleep in honey or vinegar, a jar of rose petals winks like a fairy caught in a lattice, and the cook thinks of a cordial for later, when the night grows long and the throat wants a soft blanket. Evening draws its boundary across the sky. Torches flare in iron brackets. Shadows shake themselves awake like dogs after river water, and the kitchen brightens with that intimate light that makes copper look like sunset and steam look like faith made visible. The cook sets the spits anew, a larger joint now, boar or venison if the forest was generous, and he orders a paste of garlic and parsley and a squeeze of lemon that arrived aged by sea, a noble traveller who remembers far harbours. The soundscape thickens, the spit's slow complaint, the cauldron's agreeable mutter, the quick punctuation of chop 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 from the board, the clink of ladle against rim, the occasional scold of fat when it meets flame. He keeps count of 100 small things. How many breaths until the sauce must be strained? How many heartbeats until the pie's lid is brushed with egg? How many steps it takes to cross from pepper to salt, and all of it folds into a calm too large to name. The hall above begins to pulse with music, a lute finding its footing, a fiddle trying on a laugh. And that merry architecture builds itself while the cook works with the sober joy of someone who understands both hunger and its remedy. The evening feast becomes a procession. Trencher bread laid like moons across the long tables, joints carved with the care due to anything that was once living, sauces poured as though writing a gentle cursive on the world, small tarts filled with custard and a scrape of nutmeg, a miracle grated from a stone that once rode a camel. The Lord compliments the steward pretends modesty and accepts the compliment as if he grew it himself, and none of it troubles the cook, who listens from below, amused that praise has as many steps to travel as a dish. By the time the last platter is sent, the kitchen has that sweet, weary quiet of a well-kept promise. Bowls rest, knives lie with their edges turned inward as if to sleep, and the spit boy's freckles look like stars in a face that has met a long night and won. The cook finally sits, not on a chair of honour, but on the sturdy stool that knows the shape of his day, and he takes a bowl of pottage still warm as a friendly hand, and he eats slowly, with gratitude so plain it might be mistaken for silence. He gives the cat a sliver of fish, and the cat blesses him with a blink longer than a prayer. Outside, rain begins to think about the roof, tapping a quiet that belongs only to those who have finished their work. The cook sips a cordial of honey and rose that slides down the throat like a lullaby. And he lets his bones tell him what he already knows, that he has fed a house and kept a fire, and that this is a life worth sleeping inside. He tidies as some people pray, not to impress anyone, but to return the world to its best self. Ash raked, coals banked under a nest so that morning will not have to beg for a spark, knives wiped and oiled, the long spoon leaned in its corner like a shepherd's staff He thinks, just briefly, of the year's wheel turning, harvest feasts with their golden chaos, lean months when dried beans are counsel and comfort, fasting days when fish becomes a sermon, feast days when spice jars are opened like treasure chests and cinnamon dust hangs in the air like a memory of islands. He knows the weather owns tomorrow, that a hard frost may tighten every leaf, and that soup tastes better when the world feels brittle at the edges. He knows too the talk in the hall, the bits of rumour that fall through the floorboards like crumbs. A marriage, a boundary quarrel, a birth, a plague somewhere far enough to feel unreal, a pilgrimage being planned to a shrine that keeps a finger bone of a saint. He tucks all these into the cupboard of his mind, not gossip, but because flavour belongs to story, and story belongs to those who feed others. The candles burn low, wicks making small crowns of ember, and the cook's eyes begin to drift, not quite open, not quite closed, as the cat resettles with the authority of one who knows which lap is the safest island. He considers, without speaking, the small things that make the day soft. A boy who remembered to skim the pot at the right time, a crust that rose exactly as asked, a steward's nod, a handful of pepper not spilled, the simple miracle that water boiled and meat browned and herbs did the work they were born to do. He thinks of the people who ate, the way their faces loosened as hunger left them, and he sends them off with a wish he never says aloud. May your sleep be as full as your bellies, and your dreams as kind as your bread. The rain deepens, a hush upon a hush, and the old stones of the kitchen hold the sound like a shell holds the sea. The cook leans back, and you lean with him, as if a chair were a boat rocked by the tiniest tide, and the breath leaves and returns and leaves again, and nothing is required of it except its faithful returning. Above, the hall quiets, footsteps, diminishing like fading notes, the final scrape of a bench, the giggle that forgot itself and then remembered to go to bed. The kitchen's last light is the glow under ash, a domesticated star waiting for tomorrow. And as the cook lets his head bow and finally close the ordinary saintliness of his eyes, you feel your own lids gather the soft night, and you understand, without any sharp word or clever thought, that the day has folded itself as neatly as a napkin after supper, that work and warmth and waiting belong together like barley and broth, that the old rhythm, the one that wakes before dawn, tends the flame, listens to the simmer, feeds the house, and puts the fire to sleep, is the rhythm your body has been longing to remember. So breathe in the last sweetness of rose and honey, and breathe out the mild smoke of a fire that loved you, and let every sound drift away. The rain ticking on slate, the cat's thread-fine purr, the almost inaudible, always reliable pulse of coals under ash. It is enough, more than enough. And as the medieval cook's day comes to its unremarkable perfect close, your own night opens like a warm loaf, and you slip into it, slow and easy, carried by the knowledge that someone, somewhere, is still keeping the fire. That morning will be given a spark, that hunger will be met with care, and that sleep, this gentle feast, has already been served.